Hello. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
Good. How's everyone else doing?
Good.
Sorry for the slight delay here on getting started. All right, this is service provider training session number 1. So I'm assuming everyone on the call is a service provider.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And let me get FutureFeed up real quick. My name is Rachel Lighty. If you've not met me, I do most of the training here at FutureFeed. And I'm going to be leading today's session, of course. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So I do cover, I'm educating you guys how to use the tool. So if you've sat through the end user training, I cover, the similar stuff because you know how you use the tool. It doesn't matter if you're doing it for your own company or doing it for another company. But I'm gonna sprinkle in some tips and tricks throughout, and then I'm gonna start the session off by showing you guys a couple features that are available to service providers. All right. Um, and so we have 3 other folks on the call, and just be aware this is open to all FutureFeed users. So there's other organizations on the call, and it is being recorded. So you should get a link to the recording after today's session is ended. All right, so I'm going to point out 2 things that are available to service providers. And the first thing I want to show you is we call it the template subscription. And so what that is here I'm showing you my list of companies. Each one of these produces one system security plan. Each one of these, you would have one environment for one compliance boundary. Okay. You don't want to manage multiple compliance boundaries in one instance of FutureFeed because it's only going to give you one system security plan and one system POAM. So unless the boundaries were the exact same, then you could have one instance of FutureFeed. So for your clients, every one of your clients would have a FutureFeed tenant or environment. Depending on the client size, they could have multiple environments if they got multiple compliance boundaries. And the template subscription, what that is, it is essentially you could build out a FutureFeed environment with all of the information that you would want every one of your clients to have in their environment when you first create them their tenant, their subscription environment. Does that make sense? And so things like, oh, I should probably get out of this level 1 environment. Things like people. If your service provider company has certain roles that are interacting with your clients, you would want to have those predefined. If your company has certain teams that interact with your clients, you would want them defined, like an incident response team or vulnerability management scanning team, compliance management team. Okay, so you could pre-build roles and teams, and even your service provider users who are interfacing with your clients, tools. Let's say you're a service provider and not only are you helping them with managing their compliance package, but let's say you do vulnerability scanning for them. You could, in your template subscription, have an entry for your vulnerability scanner tool that you're using. And you would have an entry for you yourself, your company as a service provider, and you would be able to build out these entries. Okay, let's say I don't even have a vulnerability scanner one in here, but do I? No. So this is a vulnerability scan inventory item. And if your company is doing vulnerability scanning for your clients, you would have this pre-built, all these fields pre-built. You would connect it to the vulnerability scanning requirements, right? Okay, so you could see how you could have this all pre-built out, and then every client you bring on board, you just copy that templated environment, and it's already filled out with the stuff that client is, inheriting from your company as a service provider. Another thing you would want to consider is the documents. So if your company has certain documents, document templates that you use for all your clients. You could have them preloaded, connected to the right controls, all of these fields filled out as you would for any security documentation entry. And then in the assess, this is probably a big reason that a lot of services providers do want to purchase the template subscription or use it is because let's say you are doing that vulnerability scanning for your clients, you would have some sort of narrative here, a nice summary that talks about, service provider ABC is performing vulnerability scanning for company ABC. You would have that statement, that inheritance statement that should match what you have in your shared responsibility matrix pre-built out in here. And then you could also mark things inherited, partially inherited or fully inherited. So that's the power of a template subscription. You can, any questions on that? All right. The other thing that we have available for service providers, specifically service providers who have their own documentation templates, is to get there, I'll show you what it would look like. I'll click on populate. So you see here, we have a list of, there's 55 templates, FutureFeed templates. Every FutureFeed user has access to these 55 templates. We call this a document library. Okay, this is the FutureFeed template document library. Some companies can purchase this additional document toolkit from the company named Compliancy IT. So your service provider company, if you have your own document templates, you can turn them into a document library. So that way that whole library of documents is available to all your users. They would be connected here. You'd see another entry, a third line for your company and however many templates you have available to them. So as service providers, the two strongest tools, add-on tools we have is the template subscription and the document library. Okay. Did anyone sit through the end user training at all?
No.
Not yet.
What was that? I'm sorry.
Not yet.
Okay. Well, we're going to cover most of the same stuff now that I got that kind of out of the way. And then throughout, I'll kind of tell you some tips and tricks for managing multiple compliance packages. So you may not need to sit through that one. However, you can if you'd like. So when you first set up an environment for your clients, you're going to want them to fill out this, start working on this start area. A lot of this information is going to come from them. Everything about their company would go into the company information. they would need to upload their company logo. This is used in the SSP report. When they generate an SSP, their logo then would be visible. The company location, contact information. So this would all be specific to the client. Down here, you'd want to work with your client to figure out and set what their risk appetite is. This information comes into play when you're working on the system POAMs, and you have to prioritize remediation of all of the vulnerabilities, all of the system flaws. Having a risk appetite set will help you determine which items should be remediated before other items, okay? Let's see, company description. Again, this would all be specific to your client, and they would, you know, whether you guys fill this out for them or you task them to fill it out. Budget, what's their company budget? Do they have a cybersecurity budget? Of course, that's going to come in when you're planning on deploying certain IT assets to help meet the requirements. And then does that client of yours have cybersecurity insurance? If they do, how much does it cover and what does it cover? Nothing too fancy here that I gotta go over. Locations. So this is where your client's going to start defining their assessment scope. In here, you would want them to list all of the locations that they own, operate, work out of, manage. All of them, even the ones that you guys are going to know are out of scope. Okay? I say that because when your client goes into an assessment and part of the first the pre-assessment phase, I think it's called the preliminary phase and pre-assessment phase, is they will meet with the C3PAO company and have a discussion about assessment scope. So your client is going to have to tell them what their assessment scope is, what their compliance boundary is, to include anything they said was out of scope. Any good C3PAO or assessor is going to want to know what is out of scope and why you said it was out of scope. So I would recommend you guys task your clients with adding an entry. Just click new location for, you know, all locations that they own, manage, or operate. And then after they add them, they would open them up and start filling out the fields here. So if you go over to compliance, or actually overview, this description area is where I would, if you say a location's out of scope, then I would explain why you said it's out of scope here, or why they said it was out of scope here. Have them explain that. So that way that it shows the assessor that that analysis was done. You and that client did consider that other location together. And it's also going to be helpful, you know, most people are waiting a year and a half, 2 years for an assessment, and they may not remember, you know, what they said was in scope and out of scope. So having that information in FutureFeed is going to be able to jog their memory when they're having that conversation with the assessment team. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to jump to another area quick. I would do the exact same for tools, okay? This is where they're going to log all of the technology they're using. And again, I would have them log everything to include the out of scope stuff, because then after they open up the item, you go over to the compliance section and you can mark things out of scope. So here we're saying that we have some sort of file share and it's saying it's out of scope. The assessor then is going to say, well, why is it out of scope? because if you look at the categories of CMMC assets, out of scope assets are assets that do not store, process, or transmit CUI, and they're not providing any security protection to CUI, and they must be physically and logically separated, okay? So when you say something is out of scope or your clients mark something as out of scope, I would recommend always making it a point to then going over maybe in the description area and defining why you said it was out of scope. And for IT assets specifically, there's that whole logical separation. And so under the evidence area is where you may want to put some evidence supporting that determination of out of scope. Evidence showing logical separation. Something like firewall rules, or if your client has a certain VLAN, virtual network, that is specific to CUI business, you'd want to show evidence that there's access control lists and rule sets that are appropriately filtering that traffic into that enclave, that segment of their network, okay? So all throughout FutureFeed, when you're entering technology and locations, have them list out everything and then work with them to define, okay, whatever, what you listed, let's figure out what's in scope and what's out of scope. What's out of scope, try to capture that analysis and that reasoning. And if you can, try to get some evidence in FutureFeed. So whenever you go into that assessment, you can show proof that you did that analysis and your categorization and your scoping effort was accurate. All right, let me go back to start. So in FutureFeed, they designed the user face to work left to right. So you start here and move on, okay? So in start, here's where they're providing all their company information, as I mentioned, the locations. And then here is where they're going to define all of the hardware and software that they're utilizing, who owns it, and who's maintaining it. I put a good example of this in the getting started guides. If you go down to the compliance implication section, there's a table here. I couldn't get this table to look nice. I'm still working on it, but let me just copy this. Whoever put this in there, I would put a lot more information in there than that. But here's kind of like maybe something I'd put. You know, is all hardware maintained by the organization? Yes or no? In this example, I said no, and then why? So internally, what are they maintaining? And then what is being maintained by external service providers? And then I've added this note. Please see the appropriate inventory item for additional details. So when I say inventory item, I'm referring to these entries, these inventory items. And so I'm saying, please see that service provider inventory item, which should provide details about the contract and the shared responsibility matrix and contract life cycle. When does it end? Who's the main contact for that external service provider? So you can refer to the getting started pages for some guidance on how to fill that area out. Okay. Then after they fill out the company information, they'll move on to scope. And this is where you're going to start defining the system. And when we say system under CMMC NIST 171, we're not referring to one particular system. We're referring to that whole compliance boundary or assessment scope. Okay, so they need to give it a name and a unique identifier. Are they applying the NIST 171 requirements everywhere in their environment, meaning enterprise-wide implementation? Do they have maybe just one specific program office that is in scope? That'd be organizational unit. or within their environment, did they create a sub-network, enclave that where you're just applying the requirements to that one area of the network. So help them categorize, CIA, at least make sure you have the moderate set for confidentiality, right? Because that's what 171 is trying to do, is protect the confidentiality of CUI, and that they use the moderate controls from 853. So at least have this one set to moderate or high. You can go higher if you'd like. And then these here it would be up to your clients to set. I do see a lot of people just leaving it at mod. System description here, I put an example of how I would describe a system. It's okay to come back to this place if you're working with your clients and having them fill this out. They may not know their boundary. They may not know what all is in scope and out of scope at this point in time until they get to start working in the technology and looking at their contracts and following where that data is flowing. And so you don't have to have all of these fields filled out right away, but I did drop, I'm sorry, you wouldn't see this unless you still have access to the sample company environment. I'll see if I can add this example of a description up here in the getting started guides, but I'll just pause here if you kind of want to maybe take a screenshot. System descriptions can be pretty powerful, and a solid system description will really clarify for any assessors on what is in scope and what's out of scope. All right. Okay. Then you move on to contracts. Scroll down. So here is where you want your client to first log their cage code. They do need to have at least one cage code tied to their system security plan. That is the cage code that's also tied to the contract. And it's saying that under this DoD contract for this company and this cage code, here's the system environment that is going to be storing, processing, or transmitting that work for the contract. So it ties it all together. You can have more than one cage code per environment. I don't know why I'm so out of breath and I'm just standing here. So next you'd want to list out their contracts. Okay, this is really important because if you're working with a client that doesn't know their assessment scope, the very first step in scoping is defining where these requirements are coming from and where this information is coming from. And it's always tied, you always trace it back to the individual contracts. And so capturing this is going to help them start that whole scoping process. So here they need to list out the contracts that they currently have and then define in those contracts what clauses are present driving the 171 and CMMC requirements. Or if you're just working with a client that has a level 1 requirement, that would be the FAR clause, FAR 21. Any questions?
No.
All right. Data inventory. All right. So then you'd work with them to, in this assessment scope environment, what data is in it? Is it a CUI and FCI environment, or is it just an FCI environment? FCI, you would associate the tools and services that are storing, processing, or transmitting FCI. Now to get the list here, you see I have a list of tools, and it's at this point in time, because I have this environment filled out a little bit, is I would just scroll through and click on the items that store, process, or transmit FCI. But you're not going to have this list yet until they enter those tools in this area, FutureFeed, the tools area. CUI help them figure out if they have basic CUI or CUI basic, or are they also storing, processing, and transmitting CUI specified. So all of these link to the NARA website. If you need help, you can just click on it. It brings you right to the NARA website. It'll give you the description of that CUI category. Also, you might want to refer to this when you start looking at the marking requirements and helping your clients figure out how they're supposed to be marking their CUI media. That is really driven on the type of CUI they have. If they have CUI specified, there's going to be a specific banner marking, like shown here, for CTI. All of their markings should say CUI/SP-CTI. If they just have CUI basic, then the simple CUI banner is sufficient. But if they're working with specified, it would be different. So I would use the hyperlinks to bring you to the NARA website to help determine if they are working with that category of CUI. And then if they are, is it CUI basic or CUI specified, and how should they be marking that media? So it's as simple as clicking whatever they're working with. But this tool then will show up when you associate a specific asset with that category of CUI. So here we're painting the picture that my SQL database is storing, processing, or transmitting CTI. And to make that wrench show up, that also happens in the tools area. I'll show you real quick. This is an additional layer of clarity, okay? You could just leave it at the check mark, yes, somewhere in their environment, they have this CUI category. But if you want to really paint that clear picture and that data flow, then you would want to associate it with a specific technology. And that's when the wrench would show up. And to do that, you would have to go into the asset. Let's see. We'll do this Oracle database one. Go over to compliance. And of course, this one's already filled out. Let me clear it out so you can see it blank. Okay. All right. So you'd categorize it. Notice here, if I mark something like SPA or CRMA or SA, these, you can't click on this CUI icon, but as soon as you mark something as a CUI asset, then, give it a second, you can click here to further define what type of CUI. So here, then once you check this box, that's when the wrench will show up in that other area. So let me go back. Here, now I said my Oracle database, it has CTI in it. Okay. So this is the data inventory. Some clients like to know if this environment also has other internally sensitive information, like proprietary information, confidential information. Maybe they're working with HIPAA and they have some health information, or they have their employee social security numbers also in this environment. So this sensitive data inventory place is a place where they can also document that other type of information for the purpose of tracking it and ensuring it is secured. But the two main for 171 and CMMC is FCI and CUI areas. All right, and then here you can integrate FutureFeed with a ticketing system. Just put that ticketing system support email here. As a service provider, you may want to put your ticketing system there. Unless that client of yours has their own, you could put theirs in there. A tip here is that you could put anybody's email in there. Okay, so if you're working with a client who doesn't have a ticketing system and you don't want to use your own, if you have one, when I was doing consulting, to keep all of the management involved and up to speed on things, I created a shared inbox, like compliance management at futurefeed.co. And then you could put that here. So you could still generate emails to that compliance management inbox, and then anybody, all the management folks at your client's environment could have access to that inbox and see those emails come through. So it doesn't have to be a ticket system email. It could be any email. When this is enabled, though, where you see it, I'm going to disable it quick, where you see this functionality come into play is if you go up into the POAM, which is called your FutureFeed, and make sure your filters are clear. So here off to the right is a little envelope. I can't click on it right now. That's because I disabled it. But once I enable it, then you could click on that and send out emails directly from FutureFeed to that ticketing system or that shared inbox, okay? So here you could send out a email update for this POAM item. It lists out the POAM. You could type in additional notes, and then hit send. It's going to send that email, okay? If you want to see what the POAM email looks like, it's there. And then you can also send out project emails. That's also in your system POAM. In the POAM, you have the individual POAM items, and then you have POAM projects. So under here, under project portfolio, you could also get email stuff from that project, okay? And the other setting here is POAM goals. So in FutureFeed, there's a few things that will trigger a POAM entry to be automatically created. For example, if you mark an objective as not met, it's going to create automatically a POAM entry for that not met security requirement. And it's going to have a due date. You can control what that due date is. The default due date is here, and it's by quarter. So how many quarters out do you want those POAM items to be due? Here, organizational scale, this again is for your system POAM as the risk appetite was. What it's doing, and this was implemented for service providers. When I was a service provider, I had upwards of 20 different clients, and sometimes it was hard to keep information straight. And so here you would work with your client to set this scale. And then that way, everybody working in their FutureFeed environment, whether it's themselves or someone from your company, the service provider side, is all talking the same language with regards to POAM remediation or requirement implementation, okay? So what does the impact mean for them, effort and cost? For example, if you're working with a client that has 5 employees, you know, a small cost for them, maybe $500. If you're working with a client that has 200 employees, they probably have a bigger cybersecurity budget or an IT budget, and a small cost for them maybe $2,000, okay? So you're setting that scale for all of your clients, and then whenever you need to refer to it to develop out projects or plan the remediation of POAM items, it's right up here, this little ruler. You would refer to it. All right. Any questions so far? All right, and then the last setting we have here is you can disable the FedRAMP warning. You do have to have an admin account in FutureFeed. We did make this an option because there are companies who use FutureFeed and they don't have a FedRAMP requirement. And so they don't really need to see that warning pop up every time. Let me elaborate on this a little bit more. FutureFeed should not be used to store, process, or transmit CUI data at this time. The application itself doesn't have FedRAMP moderate authorization or equivalency, but our platform where we're hosted in the cloud, we're in AWS Gov, and they do have FedRAMP moderate. I think they even meet FedRAMP high authorization. So at this time, the application is not FedRAMP, but where we're hosted is the data and everything is being stored in a FedRAMP authorized environment. And so do let your clients know, especially when they're uploading evidence and screenshots and stuff like that, to not upload evidence of anything CUI related. But side note, we are working on implementing the FedRAMP moderate baseline, and we're a couple months out from our assessment. So when we do get moderate off equivalent, because we can only get equivalency, we can't get authorization, we'll let all of our users know.
Okay.
So that is the start area. That should be kind of the first visit for your clients to start filling out that data. Here's a recommend, maybe like hopefully this is helpful, but when it comes to filling out FutureFeed, I would recommend looking at making some sort of checklist. Okay, let me show you what I mean. Oops, I gotta go to documents. I'm gonna go over here to worksheets and actually, did I put it in lists? Okay, I created a quick start guide checklist. And you might want to use this and maybe expand upon it, okay? But I'll step back and let you see how I got there quick. So to use any of the FutureFeed available templates in the documents area, it doesn't matter if you're in working documents, see there's the populate button, or reference documents, there's the populate button, but you're going to go to this populate button. And these are the templates that you have available to you. If you search for the word quick, I created a quick start guide checklist. You can preview it by just clicking on it, but if you want to use it, you would hit copy and then scroll down and create. So now it's going to create for you a entry. You got to make sure you're in the list section because it was a list, a checklist. Let's find it. There it is. I'm going to open it up. So here is that live document checklist. So this could be a good starting checklist for you, and I would work on maybe expanding it. But what I'm trying to get at is that you might want to put together a checklist so that way when your client first logs into their environment, they have some guidance on what areas they need to start filling out. Okay, so here's the areas that we just went through. And you might want to break them out a little bit further. I just lumped them up. But here it's like, they could work through and maybe make some notes like completed by, Tiffany. Or if they have any issues. So that way you can, if you make a solid checklist, then you don't have to work on communicating to all of your clients what they need to do as soon as they get access to FutureFeed. They would just log in, see that they have a new task, pull up that checklist, and follow it and start filling out the information. So you can edit this, of course, and make it tailored to however you want to communicate it to them. This here, I don't know why I can't click on it, but I have a link here as well to a getting started guide. Are you seeing FutureFeed or are you seeing the article?
The article.
Okay.
Article.
So that checklist lines up with this article and it talks about, here's what you need to do, fill out this data, go to the people and start adding people. So here's a detailed breakdown of that checklist and it's linked in the quick start guide checklist. Okay. How do you make it so that way when the client logs in, they get that notification that they got something assigned to them? I'll show you that right now. So within the item you want to assign to them, this checklist, you'd go up to task assignments and create a new task. And you would probably, name it whatever you want. Client onboarding. Make some notes. Hi, welcome to FutureFeed. Please follow this checklist to creating your FutureFeed environment. Make it friendly and however you want to put it. And then you would assign it to that client. Okay. And then hit submit. So now when that person, who did I assign it to? Oh, I didn't have anybody assigned it there. So now when that person logs into their FutureFeed environment, I don't know how to pronounce that name. This individual, when they log in, they would see that they have a new task assigned to them. And then they would click on the task. They'd see what they got to do. There's their assignment. And then they could click on the checklist and start filling it out. Okay, so play around with it a little bit. But that's just a trick is depending how many clients you have, you might want, might not want to communicate the same thing to everyone. Please upload your logo file here. Please fill out the company description here. You might want to just turn it into some sort of SOP or checklist, get that uploaded into FutureFeed, and then use that task assignment feature to assign it to them. Okay. So after they fill out the start area, they're going to want to start creating people entries. And this may be something that you guys do for them, but you do have to be a system administrator to create user accounts. And so they will have to have a system admin on their side that can do this. But you want to start logging users. You want them to log the users that, one, will need access to FutureFeed, but also they should be logging users that are going to have some sort of compliance responsibility. Think of all the controls in NIST 171. Who's going to be implementing those controls, right? Your system administrators, you're probably going to have some sort of HR involvement for onboarding and training and offboarding. Okay, so anybody you assign NIST 171 responsibility to, you would want to create them account in FutureFeed. If you don't want them to access FutureFeed, but you want to be able to clearly associate them as responsible, then that's when this no access feature comes in. So it's essentially like logging a list of users in FutureFeed. So that way you can clearly assign someone as responsible by name, but they don't actually have access to FutureFeed, but you're doing it for the purpose of compliance management. Okay. But everybody, so either no access, for example, if your client has a facility security manager, they don't really need access to FutureFeed. But if you want to be able to clearly associate that person as responsible to the PE security requirements, you would log their name in here And that way, under the PE controls here, when you go down to the responsible, you can tag them by name. And now it's very clear to anybody internal to the company or during that external C3PO assessment that that individual is responsible for these PE controls, even though they don't have access to FutureFeed. However, I would recommend if you are going to start assigning people responsibility, I would recommend giving them access to FutureFeed. So that way you can use that task assignment like I just showed you. You could assign poems to that individual and assign controls to that individual and assign tasks to that individual. And then that individual is going to get those notifications that they have all that activity, all those things assigned to them, and they got to do that work and log that they did that work in FutureFeed. So FutureFeed will have that communication, audit trail, as well as activity completion audit trail, because when they complete something, they got to go into FutureFeed and mark that task complete. And if, the proper way is that when they mark something complete, they've also uploaded some sort of evidence that they've completed whatever it is that they had to do. Okay. So ask them for a list of users who have compliance responsibility, as well as you would create accounts in here for your own service, the people at your company who would need access to this environment. After they get the list of users put together, then start working on those roles and defining roles. A trick is in FutureFeed, always try to assign responsibility to either a role or a team. Okay, you can learn more about this up here in the Getting Started guide. Read through these, and I've highlighted the tips and tricks and stuff. But the reason is, and this happens all the time, especially with compliance frameworks, once you get something implemented, it needs to stay implemented throughout the life of that contract. So for many years, that requirement needs to stay implemented. And so what's going to happen is you're going to have personnel changes over those years, even for yourself as service providers. You'll have people who leave the company. If you assigned responsibility to a individual in FutureFeed, when they leave the company, then you have to go in and manually reassign those to the new person. Whereas if you assign them to a role or a team, it's as simple as changing out who's operating in that. So all of the IR requirements, assign them to this role. And that way, if Bill leaves the company and Scott takes over that role, when Scott logs into FutureFeed, he's going to say everything that's assigned to this role. You don't have to go in and find everything that was assigned to the old person and try to get them reassigned. Okay. Same thing with teams is you have someone that leaves the team. It's as easy as moving them out, adding the new person, and now anybody who's a member of this team is going to see all of the controls and the POAM items and the activity that this team is responsible for. Okay, so always try to assign responsibility to a role or a team. Even if you're working with like a super small company, I would still create that person a role. It doesn't have to be an official title or anything, but that way you can maintain that communication of compliance related activity throughout the years. So after they get the teams built out, oh, by the way, under role, there's this default accountable role here. What happens is if you remember, I said that there's certain things that trigger a POAM to be automatically created. Well, if you set the default accountable role here, when that POAM gets created, it's going to be automatically assigned to whoever you define here. And you're going to want to set that so that way you don't accidentally have POAM entries that aren't assigned to anyone and nobody's really working on them because they're not showing up as in their personal dashboard. Okay. So when I say personal dashboard, I'm sorry, I kind of clicked over this, but over here, there's the team responsibilities and individual responsibilities. So in FutureFeed, if I want to see everything that's assigned to me, all the security control requirements, all the technology, documentation, and POAM requirements. So you got RACI, tasks, and POAMs. Everything that's assigned to me is going to show up in here. And then if you're, you're going to be managing kind of your clients, so you can get a view of anybody who has access to that FutureFeed environment. Here's everything they have assigned to them. So after you enter the people, then you'll have them start working on the technology. The best approach is probably asking them for a complete listing of all of their IT products to include applications, cloud environments, and then start manually entering them. To do that, just hit the plus button, and I think you saw, but just start filling everything out. Hit plus, move on to the next one. Okay, and start just typing everything out. And then make it a point to go back into those tickets, open them up, and fill out the information that gets captured. And it's really important to start connecting things to the controls at this point in time. For example, Active Directory entry, I'd probably, connect to anything that talks about identity, or identify. Okay. So we got identification. The other two don't make sense. You can search by keyword, or if you happen to know the numbers, you can search by those as well and start. Oh, it's already over there. I was like, why am I not seeing this? Okay. So start connecting them to the controls. Connect your technology and the documents to the controls. So that way, when you get over here to do the basic assessment or like a gap assessment of the requirements, you're going to already see those tools and documents connected as evidence. So here I'm under 311, and if I scroll down, I see that I connected Active Directory to 311. All right, so there's the tools. You can see that they should log on-prem, cloud-based, any service providers. We have a place for people to log specific assets. So you can kind of see here, executive team and the cyber team. They both have Windows 10 laptops, but this team has a different baseline configuration than the other team. And so if you have to really identify specific assets, specific configuration baselines, that's a place for you to do it. They should list out any vendors they have, cleaning teams, shred company vendors, have them list them out. And then after tools, they would move on to listing out their security documentation that they currently have and the security documentation that they're gonna be implementing. And it's the same kind of layout, same thing, is hit the plus, type it out, fill it out. Wow, spell right. Whatever hit plus, start typing them in, and then go in, click on that item and fill out the data and link it to controls. And then the populate button, that's how you're going to get access to the templates, okay? And I got to drop in 2 minutes for another meeting, so I'll open the floor. Do you guys have any questions? Well, actually, before we get into questions, I just want to state that this was Service Provider Training 1. And so next session in Training 2, we're going to talk about how to perform an assessment, how to log assessment results in FutureFeed and connect evidence, Then we'll talk about reviewing the system security plan, managing the system poem, and some deliverables. And so I would not sign up for the second session until you've started completing the stuff we've covered today. So that way you can figure out, you know, if you get stuck on something, when you come to the second session, you can ask, you know, questions and get some more tailored guidance on anything that you need help with. All right, any questions?
No, thank you.
You're
No, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rachel.
You're welcome. All right, feel free to drop. Thanks for your time. I'll talk to you guys in the second session.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.